After being demoted to guarding the company's warehouse gates for 3 years, my manager suddenly decided he wanted to reinstate me. When he marched down to find me with a horde of executives in tow, I was right in the middle of a mobile game with my 2 work buddies. A manager immediately lost his temper, barking at me. You used to be a decent team lead, and now you're rolling in the mud with these low lives. Get your ass back to your desk. There's a major contract that needs your signature. Zach, the supervisor who had stolen my position, looked at my dusty, worn-out clothes and sneered. It's your lucky, Finn. The company books have a tiny $100 million leak. If you just sign this confession and admit you took the money, the company promises to take care of you for life. VP Richard, wearing his usual greasy friendly mask, chimed in. What's the point of wasting your life with these 2 losers? Make the fall for this, and the moment you get out, I'll hand you a promotion on a silver platter. My fingers never stopped tapping the screen, but I was practically shaking with suppressed laughter. Losers. Trash. If only they knew who my 2 seemingly ordinary gaming buddies actually were. One was Nate, the chairman's actual grandson, who was just here to experience how the other half lived. The other was Wilson, our Supreme Group president, who had gone undercover to inspect the grassroots level, a man who detested even a single grain of corruption. I just landed a triple kill when the heavy metal door of the warehouse was kicked open with a deafening bang. 7 or 8 people filed into the room. The 3 men leading the pack stood front and center, flanked by several other managers. They had brought quite an entourage. And get your ass back to the main office and sign these papers, Manager Logan said, looking down his nose at me. I didn't even look up from my screen. Get ready for the team fight, I muttered into my headset. Logan's face, flushed with anger at being ignored, snatched the phone right out of my hands and slammed it onto the metal workbench with a loud crash. Don't push your luck, Finn, Logan snarled. The company is doing you a massive favor by letting you back into your old position. Who do you think you are? I kicked you from a director's office down to this godforsaken hole with a single word, and I can send you packing to starve on the streets just as easily. VP Richard stood with his arms crossed, his face twisted in contempt. Kid has zero ambition. We offer him a golden ladder, and he doesn't even have the sense to climb it. Instead, he wastes his time playing video games with a couple of useless drifters. I finally looked up, my eyes cold. Weren't you the one who banished me? Here, Richard. 3 years ago, I was on the fast track to a promotion. You wanted to put one of your own guys in my chair, so you made up a pathetic excuse and threw me to the gates of this warehouse. After throwing me out like trash, they thought a snapped order would bring me crawling back. Logan's eyes glinted with calculation. He assumed I had no choice. A forgotten gatekeeper would jump at any bone tossed his way. I stood up slowly, took one last drag from my cigarette, and blew a thick cloud of smoke directly into Logan's face. Coughed and sputtered, his eyes wide with rage. But Zach, the newly minted supervisor, quickly held him back. Finn, don't be stupid, Zach said. A greasy smile plastered across his face. We're trying to help you get your old life back. The new project is huge, and we need an experienced manager. You're the best fit. Besides, we used to be brothers. I'd never set you up. I let out a dry laugh. Brothers? I practically raised you in this industry, Zach. I gave you half my clients and taught you everything I knew. And you repaid me by going behind my back, stealing my accounts, and framing me for taking kickbacks. You don't get to call me your brother. Zach had started as my intern. I had poured everything into mentoring him, only for him to stab me in the back. The moment he got a taste of greed exposed, Zach's face twisted in embarrassment. Sneered, looking down at my dusty, faded blue-collar uniform. What are you acting so high and mighty for? You think we can't handle a pathetic gatekeeper? We tried to play nice, but if you want to make this difficult, we have other ways. Flicked his wrist, and 2 burly security guards stepped forward, towering over me. If you won't sign willingly, we'll drag you to the office and press your thumb onto the ink. Ourselves beside me, Nathan Wilson. My 2 gaming buddies set their phones down, and they stood up, frowning. What do you think you're doing? You want to get physical? Logan's expression curdled at the interruption. What do you 2 warehouse rats know about anything? He sneered, waving them off like pesky flies. Get lost. This is a management matter. So working in the warehouse means we aren't part of the company? Wilson asked, adjusting his wide-rimmed glasses. He spoke with his usual slow, measured cadence. There's a chain of command, and using your corporate authority to threaten and harass an employee is a blatant violation of labor laws. Labor laws? Zach burst out laughing. Can you, illiterate garbage, even read the employee handbook? What do you know about the law? He pointed a thumb at VP. Richard, do you have any idea who Richard's backing is? Even the chairman has to treat him with respect. Labor laws. We could tear this entire warehouse down, and the chairman wouldn't dare say a word to us. Keep running your mouths and I'll fire both of you on the spot. The chairman, Nate, shrugged, a faint smirk playing on his lips. That's funny. I've never heard him mention your names before. Richard blinked, then erupted into a roaring laugh. What kind of delusional garbage? Are you spitting? You know, the chairman. You look like a beggar who can't even get past the lobby doors. Keep dreaming, kid. Wilson's gaze turned frosty. Richard, the chairman might not know you, but I certainly do. A year ago, you were caught skimming from the employee bonus pool. I thought you had learned your lesson, but it seems you've only grown more reckless. Do you honestly think you could pull off a stunt like this without anyone noticing? Richard's face went from pale to a dark, furious red. Wilson had hit a nerve exposed in front of his subordinates. VP Richard exploded. What the hell did you just say? Seeing his boss lose his temper, Manager Logan lunged forward, grabbing Wilson by the collar and yanking him out of his chair. Where did you get these pathetic rumors, you piece of trash? Our VP is a man of absolute integrity. Keep running your mouth and I'll personally shut it for you. He shoved Wilson hard. Wilson stumbled back, crashing into a heavy metal shelf. His glasses flew off, his face shattering on the concrete. Wilson, I yelled, rushing forward to help him up. What is wrong with you? Why, are you hands-on? Wilson was a man of quiet refinement. He had a small army of assistants to handle any unpleasantness in his daily life. He had never dealt with such raw, brutish violence before. I'm the one you want, I yelled, shielding them. Leave them out of this. Nate pulled out his phone, his face pale with anger. You guys are dead. Zach was fussed. He snatched the phone right out of Nate's hand, holding it triumphantly above his head. Who are you going to call? Ha. The police. Go ahead and try. My guys will have you broken in half before they even dispatch a car. Logan waved his hand dismissively. Enough talk. Why are we wasting our breath on these minimum wage losers? You step on them and they still think your shoes smell nice. The managers burst into cruel laughter, looking down at us like we were bugs. Even the other warehouse workers began whispering among themselves, pointing fingers. But the warehouse supervisor cut in, pointing at Wilson, Nate, and me, shouting, You three ungrateful idiots. How dare you disobey direct orders from the corporate office? I'll fire all of you by the end of the shift. Logan nodded with satisfaction, then turned back to me. Finn, I'll ask you one last time. Are you signing the papers? If you say no, you're fired right now. Logan smirked. He had watched me sweat and bleed for that director position 3 years ago. I knew I had a mortgage to pay and a family to support in the city. He knew that if I got fired at my age, finding another decent job would be nearly impossible. My family would starve. The onlookers chuckled when they heard the threat of termination. But everyone expected me to break. They thought I loved this job too much to lose it. Instead, I shrugged, completely unfazed. Go ahead and fire me. It's not like there's any lower room for demotion. Anyway, the entire room went dead silent. Nobody expected me to throw away my livelihood so easily. Zach stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Think carefully, Finn. Once you're out of this company, you're blacklisted. You'll never recover. Spend too much time rolling in the mud with these losers. You don't even know what's good for you anymore. I laughed. Do whatever you want. Fire me. You guys have never cared about rules anyway. What can a simple gatekeeper do to stop you? Seeing my stubbornness, VP Richard stepped forward, patting Logan on the shoulder. He turned to me with a greasy, paternal smile. And let's be reasonable. The company has been very generous to you. For 3 years, we've paid your salary and kept your benefits active. Any other place would have thrown you out onto the street long ago. We're offering you a Lifeline out of old friendship. You sign for the 100 million and you'll do a few easy years. When you get out, the associate director's chair is yours and the company will take care of you for the rest of your life. You're a goteke per fin. What other future do you have? He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You need to understand something. I can make you or break you with a single phone call. Cooperate and everyone wins. Refuge and I'll make sure no company in this state ever hires you again. I looked him dead in the eye and smiled. Richard, there's always a bigger fish in the sea. Did you really think your crimes would stay buried forever? Richard's smile vanished. He nodded to the two burly guards to grab me, but Nate stepped directly in front of me. His chest puffed out. If you lay one hand on him, I'm telling my grandfather everything. Your grandfather? Zach mocked, bursting into another fit of laughter. Who the hell is your grandfather? A construction worker or a street sweeper? Nate ignored him, locking his eyes on VP Richard. His corporate authority is nothing compared to my grandfather's. You look down on us for earning minimum wage, but my grandfather makes more in an hour than you'll see in a lifetime. The warehouse fell quiet for a fraction of a second before exploding into hysterical laughter, but they couldn't fathom a warehouse worker having any real power. Enough games, VP Richard snapped, his patience entirely depleted. Unless you can miraculously summon the group president himself to this filthy floor, you are signing those papers today. I glanced at Wilson, who was staring at VP Richard with a dark, terrifying expression. It was a look I recognized last week when the supervisor was tricked into signing a fraudulent supplier agreement. Wilson had taken one look at it and the supplier had come crawling back the next morning begging to tear up the contract. Wilson was a man who detested corruption, and he certainly wasn't going to let these thugs walk all over us. He spoke, his tone completely flat. $100 million deficit. And you are certain you want Finn to take the blame for it? Richard scowled, really, to look at Wilson. Who asked you, old man? You want to pack your bags too? Wilson pulled a spare pair of glasses from his breast pocket, slipped them on, and stared at Logan and his cronies. You said only the president could resolve this. Well, I am here. How do you want to handle it? He pulled out his phone and pressed speed dial. His voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet warehouse, every word carried like thunder. This is Wilson Pendleton. Send the Internal Affairs and Audit Division to the West Side warehouse immediately. We have a massive embezzlement case to secure. Wilson hung up. VP Richard's face drained of color, his lips trembling slightly. Wilson Pendleton, the president? What are you doing here? Zach and Logan stared in disbelief. The president working in a dusty warehouse? That's impossible. There must be a mistake. Zach leaned in close to Richard, whispering urgently. Richard, have you ever actually seen the president in person? He's bluffing. The corporate office never said anything about Wilson inspecting the warehouse floor. Hearing this, Richard's panic turned back into red-hot fury. Greasy sneer returned the group president on a warehouse floor. You really think I'm that stupid? Everyone knows Wilson Pendleton is in Europe. How dare you pretend to be the president to scare me? You warehouse trash, really? Or something else? I'm going to make sure you never walk again. Then grab all three of them and beat some sense into them. The burly guards closed in on Wilson. Seeing that his actual title meant nothing to these thugs, Wilson's face went completely dark. How dare you touch the president of this company? One of the guards laughed, spitting on the floor. The president? If you're the president, I'm his father. They grabbed Nate too. He struggled against their grip, shouting, I am the chairman's grandson. If you touch me, my grandfather will destroy you. The managers ignored his threats, laughing in his face. Go ahead and cry to your granddaddy, kid. The other workers watched, whispering coldly, but then a guard grabbed Wilson by the throat, pinning him against a shelf. Two other men pinned my arms behind my back, holding me fast, while another guard kicked Nate hard in the back of the knee, forcing him to his knees on the concrete. I'm going to break you pieces of trash. Suddenly a roaring, authoritative voice echoed from the warehouse entrance. Who dares to touch my grandson? The sheer volume of the voice made the dust dance in the air, vibrating against the corrugated metal roof of the warehouse. The guard, pressing my arms behind my back, flinched, his grip slackening just Enough for me to yank myself free. The heavy loading dock doors hadn't just been opened. They had been aggressively hauled apart. Standing in the blinding wedge of afternoon sunlight was a man in his late 70s, leaning heavily on a silver-handled cane. Despite his age, he radiated an aura of absolute terrifying authority. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than the entire warehouse inventory. Behind him, a phalanx of men in tailored black suits poured into the space. These weren't the bloated Reno thugs VP Richard had brought down. These were hardened professional security details. Flanking them was an army of men and women holding sleek briefcases and tablets. The internal audit division. Grandpa Nate coughed, rubbing the back of his knee where the guard had kicked him. You're late. I almost lost a team fight. The entire warehouse froze. The silence was so profound you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. VP Richard turned around. The greasy, arrogant sneer that had been plastered on his face for 3 years melted off in real time, replaced by a mask of sheer unadulterated terror. He stumbled backward, his polished Italian leather shoes slipping on a patch of oil. Chairman Vance Richard whispered, the words catching in his throat like broken glass. Manager Logan dropped his hands to his sides, his jaw unhinged. Zach, the backstabbing intern who had stolen my life, looked like he was about to vomit. The silence in the warehouse was heavy, broken only by the low, rhythmic hum of the high-voltage transformers outside. The 2 security guards who had been holding my arms hostage let go so fast it was as if my faded blue uniform had suddenly turned to white-hot iron. They scrambled backward, their heavy boots scuffing against the concrete, their eyes fixed on the entrance. Chairman Vance did not look like a man who spent his time in boardrooms. He looked like a monument carved from granite. He leaned slightly on his silver-handled cane, but it was clear the cane was a preference, not a necessity. His gaze swept over the cluttered warehouse floor, passing over the towering pallets of inventory, the rusted metal shelves, and finally settling on the group gathered around the workbench. Grandpa, Nate said again, his voice cracking slightly. He was still on one knee, rubbing the joint where the guard's boot had connected. He looked less like the heir to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate and more like a teenager who had just been caught staying up past his bedtime. They ruined our match. I was 1 kill away from a promotion. Stand up, Nathan, Vance said. His voice was low, but it filled the cavernous room, echoing off the corrugated metal ceiling. A representative of the Vance family does not negotiate from the floor. Nate scrambled up, brushing the gray concrete dust from his knees. He didn't look at Logan or Zach. His eyes were fixed on the doorway behind his grandfather, where several men in dark suits had already begun setting up portable tables and briefcases with quiet, clinical efficiency. VP Richard's knees buckled. For a second, I thought the man was going to faint. Right into the oil patch behind him. His face, usually a bright, healthy pink, maintained by expensive lunches and golf courses, had turned the color of wet plaster. He reached out blindly, his hand catching the edge of a wooden pallet. To steady himself. Chairman Vance, Richard stammered, his greasy, paternal confidence vanishing entirely. He tried to force a smile, but his lips merely twitched, exposing his teeth in a grimace that looked more like a death mask. We didn't expect you. There was no notice from the executive suite. If we had known, you were conducting a personal inspection. An inspection? Vance's eyebrows rose slightly. He took 2 steps forward, the silver tip of his cane clicking sharply against the floor. If I had sent notice, Richard, would I have had the privilege of seeing how you treat our senior staff? Or how your hired hands use physical violence on my grandson? Manager Logan's face had gone from red-hot fury to a hollow, frozen mask of terror. His hand, which had been resting on Wilson's collar just moments ago, hung limp at his side. He looked at Wilson, who was quietly picking up the pieces of his shattered spectacles from the dirt, and then back to the chairman. Mr. Pendleton, Logan whispered, his voice barely a squeak. He said his name was Wilson Pendleton, Wilson said, his voice flat and perfectly calm. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped a smear of grease from his hand. Didn't look angry. He looked bored, the way a math teacher looks at a student who has failed the same simple equation for the 3rd time. I believe you called me warehouse trash just a few minutes ago, Logan. You also threatened to ensure I would never walk again. I didn't know. Logan fell to his knees, his hands clasped together in a desperate gesture of prayer. Mr. President, please. I was only following orders. The VP Richard told me we had to get the signature today. He said the company's survival depended on it. He told me Finn was the only one who could sign off on the discrepancy. Logan, shut your mouth. Richard hissed, though his voice lacked any real venom. He was trembling so violently that his expensive watch clicked against his cufflink. Enough, Wilson said. He didn't raise his voice, but Logan went instantly silent, his mouth still half open. Wilson turned his head toward the door, where a tall, sharp-featured woman in a gray-tailored suit stood waiting. Ms. Vance, have the security team secure the gates. No one leaves this facility. Not the managers, not the guards, and certainly not the vice president. Already done, Mr. President, she replied, gesturing to two of the suited men, who immediately closed the heavy metal loading doors, sliding the iron bolt into place with a heavy, final thud. The warehouse felt smaller now. The high-class executives who had marched in, like conquerors half an hour ago, were now crowded into the corner near the tool racks, guarded by three of the chairman's personal security details. Two folding chairs had been brought in from the security office. Chairman Vance sat on one, his hands resting on the head of his cane. Wilson sat on the other. A fresh pair of wire-rimmed glasses, brought to him by his assistant, settling onto his nose. Finn, Wilson said, looking at me. Come here. I stepped forward, my work boots heavy. I had spent 3 years in this place, breathing in the smell of rust, damp cardboard, and diesel exhaust. My hands were calloused, and my blue shirt had a permanent grease stain near the hem from when I had repaired the gate motor last winter. 3 years ago, Wilson said, his eyes scanning my face, you were the director of logistics for the entire Northern District. Your reports were always 3 days early. Your variance margin was less than 0.5%. Then, suddenly, a report came through claiming you had accepted a 6-figure bribe from a local freight contractor. You signed a confession and you were demoted. I didn't sign a confession, I said quietly. We have the document in the Central Archive, Wilson said. It has your signature and your thumbprint. I signed an equipment requisition form for Zach, I replied, pointing a finger at my former intern, who was currently trying to shrink behind Logan's bulk. Brought it to me at 10 p.m. on a Friday. He said the warehouse needed 3 new forklifts before the Monday shift. The page with the signature block was separate from the main body of the document. I trusted him. I signed it. Zach flinched as if he'd been struck. Finn, that's not how it happened. You're lying. You wanted the money for your mother's medical bills. Everyone knew you were struggling. My mother died 4 years ago, Zach, I said, my voice deadpan. My bills were paid off 6 months before you even started your internship. A quiet rustle went through the group of auditors. The woman in the gray suit, Ms. Vance, laid a thick leather folder onto the metal workbench, the same workbench where Logan had smashed my phone. We've spent the last 48 hours tracing the origin of the $100 million discrepancy, she said, her voice clear and professional. The leak didn't start 3 years ago. It started 5 years ago, shortly after VP Richard took over the regional acquisition budget. The money wasn't taken in one lump sum. It was funneled through 72 different shell companies, all registered in the Cayman Islands under the names of various relatives of manager Logan and supervisor Zach. Richard's face went from pale to a dark, congested purple. This is a setup. The audit division has no authority to seize personal financial records without a warrant. We didn't seize them, Richard, Chairman Vance said, his voice dry. Your brother-in-law, who runs the third shell company on the list, was arrested at JFK Airport 6 hours ago. He was carrying 3 passports and $80,000 in cash. He was very cooperative. He gave us the passwords to the offshore accounts in exchange for a recommendation of leniency. The silence that followed was absolute. Zach looked at Richard, then at Logan, and finally at me. The greasy, confident smirk he had worn when he told me he'd never set me up was completely gone. His knees gave out, and he sank to the concrete floor, his head in his hands. I didn't want to do it, Zach sobbed, his voice muffled by his palms. Richard told me if I didn't help him set up the logistics dummy accounts, he'd fire me and blackball me from the industry. He said Finn was too smart, that Finn would notice the weight discrepancies in the shipping manifests. We had to get him out of the main office. And so you put him here, Wilson said, his voice dropping an octave, where he could watch the gate, where he could see every truck that entered and left the facility. Yes, Zach whimpered. That was your second mistake, I said. I walked over to the small, rusted metal desk near the gate. It was a cheap piece of furniture, held together by duct tape and prayers, but it was mine. I pulled open the bottom drawer, which creaked loudly, and reached past a half-empty pack of cigarettes and an old wrench. I pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. The cover was stained with coffee, and the pages were yellowed at the edges. What is that? Logan asked, his voice shaking. My logbook, I said, laying it on the workbench in front of Wilson. You Thought that by putting me at the gate, you were putting me out of the game. But a gatekeeper's job is to watch. For 3 years, every single truck that came through those gates had to stop for me. I recorded their license plates, their container numbers, and their declared weight. I opened the ledger to a page marked with a red tab. According to the official corporate books, the West Side warehouse received 42 shipments of high-grade copper wire from the Southern refinery last quarter, I said, pointing to my handwritten entries. But according to my gate logs, those same trucks arrived empty. They stayed inside the yard for exactly 12 minutes, just long enough for the driver to have a coffee and sign the gate pass, and then they left. Wilson turned the pages, his eyes moving quickly over the neat, precise rows of numbers. A small, cold smile appeared on his face. $100 million in inventory, Wilson murmured. On paper it was delivered here and then lost due to water damage or theft from unsecured yards. But in reality, the inventory never existed. The purchase orders were fake, the shipping receipts were forged, and the money went straight into Richard's accounts. Finn, Richard said, his voice suddenly dropping its defensive edge replaced by a desperate, pleading tone. Finn, listen to me. We can work this out. You're a smart man. You've been here 3 years. You know how the system works. There's enough money for everyone. We can transfer $10 million to your account tonight. No one has to know about the ledger. We can just say it was an accounting error. Chairman Vance let out a short, dry bark of laughter. It wasn't a happy sound. $10 million, Vance said, standing up. He walked over to Richard, his cane tapping once with every step. You are offering a bribe to an employee of my company in front of the president, the chairman, and the legal division. Richard, I knew you were greedy, but I didn't realize you were quite this stupid. He turned to the head of his security detail. Call the police. Tell them we have 3 suspects for grand larceny, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. Ready for pickup. No. Logan screamed, lunging forward. He didn't go for the door. The security guards were too big. Instead, he went for the workbench, trying to grab my ledger. I didn't even have to move. One of the guards simply stepped into his path, caught him by the shoulder, and twisted his arm behind his back with a quick, practiced motion. Logan let out a sharp cry of pain and was forced down onto the concrete beside Zach. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 3 cruisers and an unmarked black sedan parked in the gravel yard outside, their red and blue lights flashing against the dirty windows of the warehouse. The arrest was quiet. Richard didn't fight. He let the officers lead him out, though he kept his head down, trying to shield his face from the few warehouse workers who had gathered near the fence to watch. Logan was still weeping, muttering about his mortgage and his family, while Zach looked entirely numb, his eyes fixed on the gravel as he was guided into the back of a patrol car. The warehouse yard, which had been a quiet, forgotten corner of the company for 3 years, was suddenly the center of the universe. Nate walked over to me, holding his phone. The match went to AFK, he said, sighing. We lost 20 points of rank. But honestly, watching Richard's face turn purple was worth it. You're a terrible support player anyway, Nate, I said, a small smile finally breaking through my tired expression. You always rush the mid lane without checking the bush. Hey, I was baiting them, Nate protested, though he was smiling too. Besides, Grandpa says I have to start taking my executive training seriously now. No more undercover shifts in the logistics department. Wilson walked over, his expression serious but no longer cold. He looked at my dusty uniform, then at the ledger still sitting on the bench. 3 years, Finn, Wilson said. You could have gone to the press. You could have hired a lawyer. Who would have believed me? I asked, looking out the open door at the police cars. Richard had the board's ear. Logan had the HR department in his pocket. If I had made a noise, they would have used that fake confession to put me in prison 3 years ago. My only choice was to wait, watch, and keep my head down until they made a mistake big enough to bring the whole structure down. And they did, Wilson said. The $100 million leak was too big to hide. They needed a scapegoat, and they thought the gatekeeper they'd forgotten about was the perfect target. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver key card. It was the master key for the executive suite at the headquarters downtown. The director of global logistics position is currently vacant, Wilson said, holding the card out to me. The salary is 3 times what you were making before your demotion. You'll have a staff of 40, your own budget, and a direct line to my office. What do you say? I looked at the silver key card, then back at my small, rusted desk by the gate. The 3 years I had spent here hadn't been easy. The winters were freezing, the summers were stifling, and the silence was often deafening. But it had taught me how to watch the details. It had taught me that the biggest structures are often held together by the smallest bolts. I'll take the job, I said, taking the key card. But on one condition. Wilson raised an eyebrow. And what is that? I want to keep the ledger, I said, tapping the leather book. Just to remind myself what happens when people start ignoring the gate. Wilson smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. Agreed. Now, go home, Finn. Wash the dust off your boots. Your first board meeting is at 9 a.m. tomorrow. The executive floor of the Pendleton Group headquarters was a world of glass, polished marble, and quiet whispers. It was a stark contrast to the grease-stained concrete of the West Side warehouse, but as I walked through the double doors of the main boardroom the next morning, I didn't feel out of place. My suit was new, but the calluses on my hands remained. The room was filled with senior vice presidents, regional directors, and board members. The air was thick with tension. News of Richard's arrest had leaked to the financial press at dawn, and the company's stock had dipped 3% before the opening bell. As I entered, the whispers stopped. Many of the people at the table had known me 3 years ago. Some of them had even voted for my demotion, believing the forged confession without a second thought. Now they looked at me with a mixture of apprehension and forced respect. I didn't sit in the back. I walked straight to the head of the table, where my nameplate, Finn Vance, Director of Global Logistics, had been placed directly to the right of President Wilson Pendleton. Wilson entered a moment later, followed by Nate, who was wearing a suit that looked slightly too big for him but carrying himself with a new quiet confidence. Gentlemen, Wilson said, taking his seat. The events of yesterday have made it clear that our internal auditing procedures have been compromised for some time. We are here today not to discuss damage control, but to begin a complete restructuring of our supply chain management. He turned to me. Finn, the floor is yours. I stood up, opening my laptop. Behind me, the large projection screen lit up with a series of complex flowcharts and supply routes. They weren't the idealized charts the corporate office usually looked at. They were the raw, gritty reality of our shipping lanes, filled with the small, red flags I had spent 3 years identifying from my gatekeeper's desk. For the past 36 months, I began, my voice steady and professional. Our logistics division has been operating on a system of trust rather than verification. We are going to change that. Every shipment, every container, and every gate pass will now be tracked in real time, using a decentralized ledger system that cannot be altered by any single manager, no matter how high their rank. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of several directors who had previously turned a blind eye to Richard's special projects. The era of the golden ladder is over, I said quietly. From now on, the only way up is through the work. There were no objections. The board members simply nodded, some of them scribbling notes furiously, others looking down at their hands. They knew that the man standing before them wasn't just a corporate ladder climber. He was a man who had survived the mud, and who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. 2 weeks later, the dust had finally settled. The stock price had recovered. The new tracking system was being implemented across all regional warehouses, and the legal team was preparing for the trial of Richard, Logan, and Zach. It was a Friday evening, around 7 p.m. The corporate office was mostly empty, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the hallway. I walked down to the small recreation room on the 3rd floor, where a high-end gaming monitor and 2 comfortable chairs had been set up, a small concession Nate had managed to extract from his grandfather as part of his executive development program. Nate was already there, his fingers flying across his phone screen. Finn, he yelled without looking up. Get in here. The regional tournament starts in 5 minutes, and our mid laner just went offline. I pulled out my own phone, logging into the game. My character appeared on the screen, sporting a new high-tier skin that Nate had gifted me as a thank you for saving his knee from the guard's boot. Who's our third? I asked, taking my seat beside him. The door behind us opened, and Wilson Pendleton walked in. He had removed his tie, his collar was unbuttoned, and he was holding a tablet with a custom gaming controller attachment. I am, Wilson said, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the blue light of the monitor. And this time, Nathan, if you do not protect my flanks, I will personally reassign you to the archiving division for the rest of the quarter. Nate laughed, his character moving into position on the digital map. Don't worry, President. With Finn leading the vanguard, we can't lose. I looked at the screen, then at my 2 gaming buddies, the chairman's grandson, and the group president. We were a strange team, born from grease, rust, and a $100 million conspiracy, but as the countdown for the match reached 0, I knew we were exactly where we belonged. Get ready, I muttered into my headset, my fingers moving with the familiar, steady rhythm of a man who had watched the gates and was now ready to lead the charge. Team fight starts now.